So let's take a look now at the week's trending stories with social media strategist Yavi Madurai. Yavi, good evening to you and welcome. Of course, it was Eskom, stage 6, stage 4, stage 8. Where the heck are we? Those were, I think that formed, part of the bulk of our trends this last week. Good evening. Yavi, are you there? Or have you been struck by the dreaded load shedding? I'm not sure. Yavi, can you hear me? Okay, we'll try and get Yavi back. But of course, we are wanting to look at how you responded to the hashtag Eskom, of course, stage 6 and stage 8. And of course, we want to have a look at the tragedy that befell us over the last week as well. And that was the story out of the Eastern Cape and the Enyobeni Tavern. Let's see if we have Yavi back. All right. And also don't forget to share with us your thoughts on our question of the day, which is dealing with the rising cost of living in South Africa. We'll share some more of your tweets a little bit later on. But these stories, Eskom and Enyobeni, were the big stories this week. And Yavi, I'd love to hear your take on how we kind of navigated those three top hashtags, Eskom, stage 6 and the dreaded stage 8.
Yeah, no, so look, let's start with the dreaded stage 8. So obviously that is the biggest topic of conversation at the moment as we speak. So it's all about, the main topic of conversation in terms of, not the media that is reporting on it, but what South Africans are saying. And what South Africans are feeling is that have they dropped it back down to stage 4 because they want to knock us with stage 8 on either on the weekend or on Monday? And the next part of the conversation is that stage 8 is where the load shedding schedule ends. But there is talk about will it go to stage 10 and what does stage 10 actually mean? If stage 8 says 13 hours, without electricity, what will stage 10 mean? So these are just some of the conversations that are happening at the moment with regard to stage 8, and then obviously that covers the stage 6 discussions that were happening.
Yeah, 8 and beyond, 48 hours without power, sometimes 72 hours, given, depending on the scenario. So there was, for me, what was so interesting is just the emotional responses to each of those. A great deal of fear and trepidation on the one hand, and concerns about survival, especially for people, for whom living without has been part of their lived experience, essentially. And kind of like, those two reflections on what it means in, if it continues. And then the other is the blame and the demand for answers from those in charge.
No, absolutely. And I think that your latter point is that is what is happening now from obviously from all corners, not just from a social media perspective, but in terms of that, people are questioning the fact that there was a statement made in May about what was coming, what was coming. So if they were saying that in May, why didn't they do something about it? And obviously earlier on, but obviously everyone's picking up on the conversations about the minister and the department talking about it in May. So these are some of the things. There's a lot of fear, as you were saying. There's huge amounts of fear. The question also becomes is that what does that do to our economy? It's the worst week from an economic perspective, obviously leaving out the COVID period, but it's the worst week. It's worse than 2019 is what the calls are being assessed in terms of just analysis. So there is a lot of conversation happening from a social media perspective in terms of what does stage 8 mean from different perspectives.
Yeah, and this is, I think it's actually even transcended the point of humor, comedy and jokes, because things have suddenly gotten really, very serious. And speaking of serious developments, waking up to the tragedy at Enyobeni Tavern is something, of course, you'd never want to wish on anyone, especially a parent, and especially in a context where fingers were pointed right from the get-go, especially from the highest level. What are the conversation traits that you noticed as that story developed and as more information began to roll in?
So one of the key things that I think and there's a lot of angles to it that we don't have the time to discuss all of the angles, but I think one of the key things that came out, and I'm speaking now as a parent, is that when I read some of these comments and when I analyzed it, it was a case of there was a lot of blame placed at parents' door, so to speak. And yes or no, right or wrong, nobody can say exactly what has happened. But in terms of how that conversation played out in terms of social media, there was a lot of questioning around that. There was a lot of questioning around parents. There was a lot of questioning around the kids. What kind of levels of discipline do we have? Where are the parents? These were some of the major topics of discussion. And as you said it, I still get goosebumps because I think to myself, what if that was my child? What if that was my teenager? So this is what I think is every parent's worst nightmare, as you said, but it's sitting with us as a nation to say, how do we allow this to happen in this day and age? It's 2022. How are we allowing this to happen? So I think this conversation is probably going to play out a little bit more as the investigations play out. As we know, we've seen, obviously not similar, but we've seen other tragedies like this happen, and we know what is going to happen in terms of the various pieces of evidence that will come out. We will debate it, we will discuss it, we will go through various emotions. But yeah, it's a really dark day in South Africa's history when we've got this kind of mark against our name. Truly, we do.
Yeah, and this atmosphere of mourning will continue until their bodies are laid to rest, we believe, on Wednesday, and of course beyond. And I was talking to one of our reporters who will be in the region, in the community for those funerals, Criselda Lewis, who was just saying, some of the things that we're not talking about is where are the recreational facilities for young people in this community? Where are the places that they can go to and, be young and be kids and have a safe place to enjoy themselves? No doubt questions that will form some new trends for you and I to talk about next week. Yavi Madurai, thank you very much for your time this evening.